While I was deployed, my uncle sent a video of himself beating my son, calling it justice from ISIS. What happens when soldiers aren't home to protect their kids? My son cried, "Please stop. My dad will come for you." My uncle laughed, "That weakling? I'm not scared." Then my wife spoke up, "He's just a mechanic who cleans military tires." They didn't know I was Special Forces' deadliest interrogator. Can you imagine the kind of betrayal that shatters your entire world, not just your heart, but your very soul? The kind where the people you swore to protect turn out to be the monsters you've been fighting your whole life? That's exactly what happened to me, Staff Sergeant Jake Walker, a man they called the Shadow in the deepest, darkest corners of Afghanistan. At 34, I was the Army's most feared interrogator. I could break anyone, without a single mark, just by digging into their deepest fears. My teammates called me the Shadow because when I took a case, the enemy just disappeared. What they didn't know is that my methods went far beyond any handbook. I was a master of psychological manipulation, capable of destroying a person's mind while leaving their body perfectly intact. My phone buzzed, a video message from my wife, Marissa. We'd been married 8 years, and she was supposed to be taking care of our 6-year-old son, Wesley, while I was on my 3rd deployment. I met Marissa in a dive bar near Fort Bragg, a beautiful blonde with sad eyes and daddy issues I thought I could fix. I opened the video, expecting Wesley's gap-toothed smile, or maybe Marissa complaining about a leaky faucet. Instead, what I saw made my blood run ice cold. The camera was in our living room, showing my uncle, Herman Newman, my father's younger brother, striking Wesley across the face. My little boy fell backward, tears streaming down his cheeks. "This is what happens when soldiers aren't home to protect their kids," Herman's voice sneered, cold and mocking. Wesley sobbed, looking directly at the camera. "Please stop, Uncle Herman. My dad will come for you when he gets home." Herman laughed, a sound that would haunt my dreams. "That weakling? I'm not scared of your daddy, boy. Jake's just a paper pusher who probably cleans boots for real soldiers." Then came Marissa's voice from behind the camera, and my entire world shattered. "He's just a mechanic who only cleans military tires, Herman. He's not scary like you." The video ended with Herman roughly grabbing Wesley by the arm and dragging him off camera, my son screaming for his father. I stared at the black screen for a full minute, my mind reeling. My wife, the woman I married, provided for, protected, she wasn't just allowing another man to abuse our son, she was actively participating in humiliating me. They thought I was just a mechanic. They had no idea that Jake Walker was Special Forces' deadliest interrogator, a man who had broken war criminals and extracted state secrets. They didn't know I specialized in psychological warfare, that I could destroy lives with surgical precision. My commanding officer, Colonel Blake Turner, found me 20 minutes later, still staring at my phone. "Walker, you look like you've seen a ghost." "Colonel," I said, my voice flat, "I need emergency leave." "Family crisis." Blake studied my face. He saw it. The look of a predator who'd just caught his prey. "How long?" "However long it takes to handle some unfinished business." 18 hours later, my flight touched down at Fort Bragg. I'd spent the entire journey researching, planning, preparing. Military training taught me that intelligence gathering is the foundation of any successful operation. Herman Newman, 42, lived in a rundown apartment complex 15 minutes from my house. He was a freelance contractor, mostly doing under-the-table construction. More importantly, Herman had a gambling problem and owed money to some very dangerous people. My first stop wasn't my house. It was Herman's apartment building. I needed to understand the battlefield before engaging the enemy. Sunset Manor apartments were exactly what I expected. Cracked parking lot, broken playground equipment, residents who minded their own business. Perfect for what I had planned. I positioned myself across the street with a clear view of Herman's ground floor apartment. Within 2 hours, I had my answers. Herman was dealing drugs from his apartment. Small-time stuff, but enough to bring serious legal trouble. More interesting was the parade of visitors. A young woman who stayed for exactly 30 minutes. A nervous man who looked over his shoulder constantly, and, most telling, 2 men in expensive suits who looked like they belonged to someone Herman owed money to. But the real intelligence came when I hacked into Herman's phone. The text messages painted a clear, sickening picture. Herman had been planning this humiliation for months. He'd been grooming Marissa, telling her I was just a grease monkey and that she deserved better. Even more sickening were the photos Herman had been sending, pictures of Wesley crying with captions like, "Training the boy to be a real man." The final piece of intelligence made my blood boil. Herman had been recording videos of abusing Wesley for weeks, building a collection he sent to other sick individuals online. My nephew wasn't just a victim of physical abuse, he was being exploited for an audience of predators. I sat in my rental car as darkness fell, watching Herman's apartment. The old Jake, the mechanic my wife thought she'd married, would have called the police, maybe confronted Herman directly, tried to work within the system. But Jake Walker, Special Forces interrogator, had different plans. I was sworn to dismantle Herman Newman piece by piece, starting with his mind and working down to his bones. At 11 p.m., I made my move. I'd studied the building's layout, identified security camera blind spots, and memorized Herman's routine. Getting into the apartment was child's play. I'd infiltrated enemy strongholds in 3 different countries. Herman was passed out on his couch, empty beer bottles scattered around him. I didn't wake him immediately. Instead, I explored the apartment, gathering evidence, understanding his life. The computer was password protected, but I had it cracked in minutes. What I found made me sick. Dozens of videos of Wesley, communication with other predators, and a detailed plan to break the boy properly when I was deployed longer. When Herman finally stirred awake, I was sitting in a chair directly across from him, perfectly still in the darkness. "Who the hell?" Herman started. Then his eyes adjusted, and he saw my face. "Jesus Christ, Jake, what are you doing here?" "Hello, Herman. We need to talk." Herman tried to stand, but I hadn't moved. There was something in my stillness that was more terrifying than any threat. "Look, Jake, I can explain." "Sit down, Herman." The command was quiet, but Herman found himself sitting immediately. My voice carried an authority he'd never heard before. This wasn't the awkward young man who'd married into their family. "I saw the video you sent me," I continued, my voice conversational. "You and Marissa had quite the performance planned out." "It wasn't. You were just what?" "Beating my 6-year-old son while my wife filmed it for my entertainment." I leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, Herman, what did you think would happen when I came home?" Herman's mouth went dry. Something in my eyes looked empty. Predatory. "I thought you were just a mechanic." "Yes, I heard that part." It's fascinating how people make assumptions. I stood up slowly, and Herman pressed himself back into the couch. "Do you know what I actually do in the army?" "You fix trucks." I smiled. The kind of smile that didn't reach my eyes. "I break people, Herman. Not their bones, though I could do that too. I break their minds. I take enemy combatants, men who would die before betraying their cause, and I turn them into sobbing children who tell me everything I want to know." Herman tried to swallow, but his throat had gone completely dry. "And the beautiful thing about my job," I continued, "is that I've become very, very good at it. So good that my commanding officers give me the cases they can't solve through conventional means." I walked to Herman's computer and turned the screen toward him. Herman's face went white as he saw his own files displayed, all the videos, all the communications with other predators, everything. "Here's what's going to happen, Herman. You're going to tell me exactly how long you've been planning this with my wife. You're going to tell me about every time you've hurt my son. And you're going to tell me what Marissa knew and when she knew it." "Jake, I can't." "Oh, but you can. Because the alternative is that I make one phone call to Detective Larry Knight at the county sheriff's office. We served together in Iraq. And suddenly, your computer gets anonymously tipped to the FBI. How long do you think a man like you lasts in federal prison, Herman?" Herman's hands were shaking now. "You don't understand, Marissa. She wanted this. She said you were weak, that Wesley needed a stronger male figure." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "Continue." We've been together for 2 years, Jake. Since your last deployment. She said you weren't man enough for her. That you were just some nobody who pretended to be a soldier." The room was silent for a long moment. Then I spoke again, my voice eerily calm. 2 years. "And my son, she said he needed discipline. Real discipline. Said you were too soft on him." I processed this information with the same clinical detachment I used when interrogating enemy combatants. My wife hadn't just betrayed me. She'd actively participated in my son's abuse for 2 years. She'd chosen Herman over her own child's safety. "Where's Marissa now?" "At your house. She's waiting for me to come over after you get back tomorrow." "Interesting. She doesn't know I'm here early." Herman nodded miserably. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot. "You know, Herman, in my line of work, we have a saying. The best revenge is the kind your enemy designs for themselves. You and Marissa have been so helpful in that regard." "What do you mean?" I turned back to him, and Herman saw something in my expression that made him want to run. "You're going to help me give my wife exactly what she deserves. And Herman? By the time I'm done with both of you, you're going to wish I really was just a mechanic." I left Herman's apartment at 3 a.m. with a detailed confession recorded on my phone, and a man so terrified he would do anything I asked. But I wasn't done gathering intelligence. I needed to understand the full scope of the betrayal before I could design the perfect revenge. My next stop was a surprise visit to my neighbor, Mrs. Celeste Richardson, an elderly widow who lived across the street and had always been fond of Wesley. I'd helped her with yard work before my deployments, and I knew she kept close tabs on the neighborhood. "Jake, my goodness, you're home early," Celeste said when she answered her door at 6 a.m. She was already dressed and making coffee. An early riser, just as I remembered. "Emergency leave, Mrs. Richardson. Family situation." I was hoping you might help me understand what's been going on while I was away. Celeste's expression darkened. Oh, honey, I was wondering when someone was going to ask. Come in, let me pour you some coffee. Over the next hour, I learned that my nightmare was even worse than I'd imagined. Celeste had witnessed Herman's truck in my driveway at least 3 nights a week. She'd heard Wesley crying through the windows on multiple occasions. Most damning of all, she'd seen Marissa and Herman together at the local grocery store, acting like a couple, while Wesley walked behind them with visible bruises. I called Child Protective Services twice, Celeste admitted, tears in her eyes. But Marissa always cleaned Wesley up before they came by, and that boy is so scared he won't tell anyone what's happening. Why didn't you call me? I tried, dear. I called the number you left, but Marissa said you were on a classified mission and couldn't be contacted. She said she'd pass along my concerns. I felt my jaw clench. Marissa had been intercepting communication, isolating me from anyone who might have warned me. Mrs. Richardson, I need you to understand something. What I'm about to do might get very complicated, and you might see things that seem concerning, but I need you to trust that I'm handling this situation. Celeste studied my face. She'd been married to a Vietnam veteran for 40 years before he passed. She recognized the look of a soldier preparing for war. That boy is lucky to have you as a father, she said simply. You do what you need to do. My final stop before confronting Marissa was the bank. I needed to understand their financial situation and what assets Marissa might have access to. What I discovered made me smile grimly. Marissa had been systematically draining our joint savings account, transferring money to an account in her name only. She'd also taken out a credit card in my name and maxed it out on purchases that clearly weren't for household necessities. She wasn't just betraying me emotionally. She was stealing from me and preparing to leave me financially destroyed. By 10 a.m., I was parked outside my own house, watching through the windows. Wesley was at school, and Marissa was alone. She was on the phone, laughing about something, gesturing animatedly. I activated the audio surveillance app I'd installed on her phone months ago, a precaution I'd learned to take with all family members of deployed soldiers. Can't wait until he gets back tomorrow, Marissa was saying. Herman, you should see his face when he watches that video. He's going to be so broken. What if he tries to fight me? Came Herman's voice through the speaker. Baby, you could take Jake with one hand tied behind your back. He's never been in a real fight in his life. The army just has him changing oil filters and rotating tires. I turned off the recording and sat back in my car. They thought tomorrow's homecoming was going to be their victory celebration. They had no idea that I had been home for hours, that I'd already dismantled Herman's life, and that I was about to introduce them both to the real Jake Walker. I checked my watch. Wesley would be home from school in 6 hours. I needed to have the first phase of my operation completed by then. I refused to expose my son to any more trauma. I walked up my own front door and used my key. Marissa was in the kitchen, her back to me, still on the phone with Herman. I'm telling you, he'll probably cry when he sees she turned around and screamed. I was standing in the doorway, still in my military fatigues, my duffel bag. Over my shoulder, looking exactly like the husband returning from deployment, except for my eyes, which held a coldness that made Marissa drop her phone. Hello, honey, I said quietly. I'm home. Marissa's face went through a rapid series of emotions, shock, fear, guilt, then a desperate attempt at normalcy. Jake, oh my God, you scared me. I thought you weren't coming home until tomorrow. She rushed toward me, arms outstretched for a hug. I caught her wrists before she could embrace me. Surprise. Marissa tried to smile, but something in my grip, in my tone, made her nervous. How long have you been home? Long enough. I released her wrists and walked into my own living room, looking around like I was seeing it for the first time. Nice setup you have here. Very comfortable. What do you mean? I turned to face my wife, really looked at her. She was wearing new clothes, expensive ones. Her hair was professionally styled. Her nails were perfectly manicured, all paid for with money she'd stolen from our joint account. I mean, this whole arrangement you and Herman have worked out. Very cozy. Marissa's face went white. I don't know what you're talking about. I pulled out my phone and played the video Herman had sent me. Marissa watched herself mock me while Herman abused our son, and with each second, she seemed to shrink. Want to try that again? I asked when the video ended. Marissa's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Jake, I can explain. Oh, I'm sure you can. But first, let me explain something to you. I sat down in my favorite chair, the one I bought when we first moved in together, back when I thought we were building a life together. You see, Marissa, you made a critical error in judgment. What error? You assumed you knew who I was, what I was capable of. My voice remained conversational, almost friendly. It's a common mistake. People see what they want to see. Marissa backed toward the kitchen, but I made no move to follow her. My stillness was somehow more threatening than if I'd been yelling. You thought I was weak, I continued. A mechanic? Someone who cleans tires for real soldiers? Someone who couldn't protect his own family? Jake, please. But here's the thing about assumptions, Marissa. They can be very dangerous when you're wrong. I leaned forward slightly. Do you know what I actually do in the army? Marissa shook her head, tears starting to form in her eyes. I break people, Marissa. It's my specialty. I take the strongest, most committed enemies of our country, and I turn them into sobbing, broken shells who tell me everything I want to know. And I do it without leaving a mark. The kitchen phone rang. I looked at the caller ID and smiled. That would be Herman. He was probably wondering why she screamed and then went silent. Answer it, Marissa. I can't answer the phone. The command carried an authority that made Marissa move before she consciously decided to. She picked up the phone with shaking hands. Hello, Marissa. What happened? I heard you scream, and then the line went dead. I walked over to my wife and held out my hand for the phone. Marissa looked at me pleadingly, but the expression on my face left no room for argument. She handed me the phone. Hello, Herman. Dead silence on the other end. I think you and I need to have another conversation. Why don't you come over? Marissa and I were just discussing your relationship. Jake, I don't think. My voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than a shout. You have 10 minutes to get here, or I start making phone calls. To the police, to your landlord, to the people you owe money to. Your choice. The line went dead. I hung up the phone and turned back to Marissa, who was now openly crying. Now, while we wait for Herman, why don't you tell me about the money you've been stealing from our account? Herman arrived in 8 minutes, which told me everything I needed to know about how terrified my uncle had become. I watched through the window as Herman sat in his truck for a full minute, gathering courage before finally walking to the door. I answered before Herman could knock. Right on time. Come in, Herman. Marissa was just about to explain how long you two have been planning this. Herman stepped into the house like a man walking to his execution. Marissa was sitting on the couch, tissues in her hands, makeup smeared from crying. Sit down, Herman, I said, gesturing to the chair across from Marissa. We're having a family meeting. Herman sat, his eyes darting between me and Marissa. I remained standing, positioned where I could watch both of them. Now, I began. I've heard Herman's version of events, about how this started 2 years ago, about how you, Marissa, decided that our son needed real discipline, about how you've been stealing money from our account and planning to leave me financially destroyed. But I want to hear it from you. Marissa looked at Herman, who avoided her eyes. Jake, you have to understand. I understand perfectly. You thought you'd married a weak man who would never fight back. You thought you could humiliate me, abuse my son, steal my money, and I'd just take it because I was too pathetic to stop you. That's not what. You made one critical mistake. I walked to the mantel where I kept my military commendations, awards Marissa had never bothered to read. You never actually looked at who you married. I picked up a framed certificate, a Purple Heart for wounds received in enemy action in Afghanistan. I set it down and picked up another, a Bronze Star with Valor device, for heroic achievement in ground combat against an armed enemy. Herman was staring at the certificates like he'd never seen them before. I picked up a third frame. This one's my favorite. Army Commendation Medal for my work in intelligence operations, specifically for developing new interrogation techniques that were adopted service-wide. Marissa's face had gone completely white. You see, Herman, when you call me a weakling who cleans tires, you are insulting a man who has personally interrogated over 200 enemy combatants. A man who specializes in psychological warfare. A man who can destroy lives without ever throwing a punch. I sat down across from both of them. And now you've given me a reason to use those skills on you. What do you want? Herman asked, his voice barely a whisper. I smiled, the same cold smile I'd used on enemy prisoners. I want justice. Unfortunately, you're both going to help me get it. How simple. You're both going to confess everything. The abuse, the affair, the financial theft, all of it. You're going to do it on camera with full detail. And you're going to sign written statements. And if we don't? Marissa asked. I pulled out my phone and showed them a video. It was Herman's apartment building with a clear timestamp from earlier that morning. This is federal agents executing a search warrant on Herman's apartment. They're going to find some very interesting things on his computer. Herman went pale. You didn't. Oh, but I did. You see, Herman, when you make enemies with someone in intelligence operations, you don't get to keep secrets. I turned to Marissa. And as for you, darling wife, I've already frozen our joint accounts and filed fraud reports on the credit card you opened in my name. The bank is very interested in talking to you. Both of them stared at me in horror. But here's the beautiful part. I continued. If you cooperate fully, confess everything, sign the documents, and do exactly what I tell you, I might be persuaded to show mercy. What kind of mercy? Marissa asked desperately. My smile widened. The kind where you get to discover exactly how creative a professional interrogator can be when someone hurts a child. 3 hours later, I had detailed written confessions from both Herman and Marissa, along with video recordings of them admitting to everything. Herman had confessed to 2 years of systematic child abuse, creating and distributing illicit content featuring Wesley, and planning to escalate the abuse. Marissa had admitted to the affair, financial theft, and actively participating in my humiliation and our son's abuse. But I wasn't finished. Confessions were just the beginning. Now comes the interesting part, I told them as I reviewed the documents. You see, I could turn these over to the authorities right now. Herman would be looking at federal charges for the content on his computer, plus child abuse charges. Marissa would face fraud charges, child endangerment, and conspiracy charges. Please, Jake, Marissa sobbed. I'll leave. I'll disappear. You'll never see me again. Oh, you're definitely going to disappear, Marissa. But not the way you think. I stood up and walked to the window. Wesley's school bus would arrive in 30 minutes. Here's what's going to happen. Herman, you're going to pack your things and leave town. Tonight. You're going to drive to Miami, check into a specific hotel, and wait for my instructions. What instructions? The kind that keep you out of federal prison. You see, Herman, I have friends in very interesting places. Some of them work in law enforcement. Others work in less official capacities. The choice of which friends I introduce you to depends entirely on how well you follow directions. Herman nodded frantically. I turned to Marissa. As for you, my dear wife, you're going to pack Wesley's things and yours. Just the essentials. Then you're going to take him to your sister's house in Charlotte. Why? Because what happens next isn't something a child should witness. My voice carried a finality that made both of them shiver. You're going to tell your sister that we're getting divorced, that you made some mistakes, and that you need a place to stay while the lawyers sort things out. Jake, please, we can work this out. Marissa. My voice cut through her pleading like a blade. There is no working this out. There is no reconciliation. There is no forgiveness. You chose to hurt my child and humiliate me. Now you get to live with the consequences. Marissa tried one more time. What about Wesley? He needs his mother. I walked over to her, close enough that she could see the cold fury in my eyes. Wesley needs to be protected from his mother. The woman who allowed her lover to abuse him for 2 years. The woman who filmed his humiliation for her own amusement. You love my son? No, you don't. If you loved him, you would have protected him. Instead, you sacrificed him for your own gratification. I stepped back. Pack his things. Now. He's never coming back to this house while you're in it. The school bus pulled up outside as Marissa was packing Wesley's clothes with shaking hands. I watched my son get off the bus, backpack over his shoulders, walking slowly toward the house like a boy who was afraid of what waited for him at home. I met him at the door. Daddy. Wesley's face lit up with joy and relief. You're home early. I knelt down and hugged my son, really hugged him for the first time in months. I could feel how thin the boy had gotten, could see the faint bruises that makeup couldn't completely hide. Hey buddy, I missed you so much. Are you staying home now? Please say you're staying home. I'm staying home, Wesley. And we're going to take a trip to see Aunt January. Would you like that? Wesley nodded eagerly. Will Uncle Herman be there? I felt something cold and vicious settle in my chest. Nobody. Uncle Herman won't be bothering us anymore. As I helped Wesley pack his favorite toys, I made a silent promise. Herman and Marissa had thought they were destroying a weak man who wouldn't fight back. Instead, they'd awakened something far more dangerous. A father who would stop at nothing to protect his child, and a soldier trained to destroy his enemies with methodical precision. The real reckoning was just beginning. After Wesley and Marissa left for Charlotte, with me following at a distance to ensure they actually went there, I returned to my house to begin phase 2 of my operation. I had 48 hours before anyone would expect to hear from me, and I intended to use every minute. My first call was to Detective Larry Knight, my old army buddy who now worked with the county sheriff's department. Jake Walker? Heard you were still overseas. What's going on? Larry, I need a favor. Hypothetically speaking, if someone had evidence of systematic child abuse and financial fraud, but wanted to handle things privately before involving law enforcement, how would you recommend they proceed? There was a pause. Larry had known me for 10 years. We'd served 2 tours together in Iraq. Jake, is everything okay? Define okay. Jesus Christ, how bad is it? I told him everything, the video, the confessions, the evidence I'd gathered. When I finished, Larry was quiet for a long moment. Jake, normally I'd tell you to bring this evidence in immediately, but given what these people did to your boy. Larry paused. How much time do you need? 72 hours. You've got it. But Jake, whatever you're planning, make sure you can live with it. Oh, I can definitely live with it, Larry. The question is whether they can. My second call was to my old unit commander, Colonel Blake Turner. Walker, you just left 24 hours ago. Please tell me you're not calling to extend your leave. Actually, sir, I'm calling to request a transfer, stateside assignment. My family situation has become complicated. Blake was quiet for a moment. How complicated? I gave him a sanitized version of events. When I finished, Blake's voice had turned ice cold. Jake, you know I have connections at CI. I could have investigators on this within hours. I appreciate that, sir. But I prefer to handle this through civilian channels. Understood. Consider your transfer approved. And Jake, if you need any resources for handling your family situation, you know how to reach me. The third call was the most important. I dialed the number I'd memorized, but never thought I'd use, Rodriguez's investigation services. Jimmy, it's Jake Walker. Jimmy Rodriguez had been my partner in intelligence operations for 3 years before leaving the Army to start a private investigation firm that specialized in discrete problem resolution for military families and government contractors. Jake, man, I thought you were still downrange. What's going on? I explained the situation. Jimmy listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. Jesus, Jake, these people really picked the wrong family to mess with. Jimmy paused. What do you need? Everything. Full backgrounds on both targets. Financial records, employment history, criminal history, family connections, debts, secrets. I want to know every pressure point they have. How deep do you want me to go? All the way down. And Jimmy, I need it fast. Give me 12 hours. I'll have a complete dossier on both of them. My final call was to Marissa's sister, Jan Kellogg, in Charlotte. Jake? Marissa just got here with Wesley. She said you two are having some problems. Jan, I need you to keep Wesley with you for a while. Things are complicated right now. Of course. But Jake, Marissa seems really upset. She's not telling me much, just that you found out about some mistakes she made. That's a generous way to put it. Jan, I need you to understand something. Wesley has been hurt badly. I'm handling the situation, but he needs to be somewhere safe while I do. Jan's voice became serious. Hurt? How? I can't get into details over the phone. But Jan, don't let Marissa take him anywhere without calling me first. And if she tries to leave with him, call the police immediately. Jake, you're scaring me. Good. Being scared will keep Wesley safe. After hanging up, I sat in my quiet house and reviewed my situation. Herman was driving to Miami, terrified and completely under my control. Marissa was in Charlotte, isolated from her support network and under surveillance by her sister. Wesley was safe and protected. Now came the fun part. I opened my laptop and began researching. By morning, I would know everything about Herman and Marissa's lives, their fears, their weaknesses, their pressure points. And then I would begin systematically dismantling everything they cared about. They had made the mistake of thinking Jake Walker was weak. I was about to show them what strength actually looked like. 72 hours later, I had orchestrated the complete destruction of both Herman Newman and Marissa Walker without throwing a single punch or breaking a single law. Jimmy Rodriguez had delivered intelligence beyond my expectations. Herman, it turned out, owed $43,000 to a loan shark named Ricardo Hobbs, who was known for creative debt collection methods. Marissa had been having not one affair, but 3. Herman was just the most recent. More importantly, she had been stealing money not just from me, but from her previous workplace, building up a pattern of financial fraud that went back years. My revenge was surgical in its precision. For Herman, I simply expedited the natural consequences of his choices. A single anonymous phone call to Ricardo Hobbs, informing him that Herman had been bragging about having money to pay his debts, but was hiding it in a Miami hotel, had resolved the Herman problem permanently. The last I heard, Herman had checked himself into protective custody with the Miami police, begging for protection from unknown assailants. The federal charges for the content found on Herman's computer would ensure he never threatened another child. But more importantly, Ricardo's people would ensure Herman spent the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, never knowing when his past would catch up with him. For Marissa, my revenge was more complex. I had systematically contacted every person in her life, her employers, her friends, her family, and provided them with evidence of her true character. Not accusations or hearsay, but documented proof. The video of her mocking me while her son was abused, bank records showing her theft, communications with multiple affair partners. Marissa's carefully constructed image as a devoted military wife and loving mother crumbled in 48 hours. Her employer fired her for theft. Her friends abandoned her. Even her own family, after seeing the evidence of how she treated Wesley, turned their backs on her. But my masterpiece was the custody hearing. I had filed for emergency custody of Wesley, backed by video evidence, written confessions, medical records documenting Wesley's injuries, and testimony from Mrs. Richardson and other neighbors. Marissa's lawyer, a public defender, since all her stolen money had been frozen by the courts, had no defense against the mountain of evidence I presented. The judge took 15 minutes to grant me full custody and issue a restraining order prohibiting Marissa from contacting Wesley without supervised visitation. I stood in the courtroom watching Marissa cry as her lawyer explained that she would be lucky to see her son once a month and only under court supervision. She looked across the courtroom at me, searching my face for any sign of the man she thought she'd married, the weak, forgiving fool who would take her back if she just apologized enough. Instead, she saw Jake Walker, Special Forces interrogator, looking at her with the same clinical detachment I'd shown enemy combatants. There was no anger in my expression, no satisfaction, just the cold assessment of a mission completed successfully. "Jake," she mouthed across the courtroom. "Please." I turned away without acknowledging her. 3 months later, I was sitting on my porch watching Wesley play in the backyard. The boy was laughing, actually laughing, for the first time since I had come home. The bruises had faded. The nightmares were becoming less frequent, and Wesley was beginning to believe that he was safe. Mrs. Richardson walked over from her yard, carrying a glass of lemonade. "That boy is lucky to have you," she said, settling into the chair next to me. "I'm the lucky one. Have you heard from Marissa?" I shook my head. Last I heard, she was living in her car in Raleigh. Seems she's having trouble finding anyone willing to help her out. And Herman? Still in protective custody in Miami. Apparently, he's developed a very serious phobia about being alone. Mrs. Richardson studied my profile. "Do you ever regret it? What you did to them?" I watched Wesley climb his swing set, the same swing set where Herman had once forced the boy to apologize for disrespecting him. Now Wesley climbed it fearlessly, knowing his father was watching, knowing he was protected. "Mrs. Richardson, I spent years in enemy territory hunting down people who hurt innocent civilians. I never thought I'd have to use those skills on my own family. But regret destroying the people who abused my son? Not for a second." My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Colonel Turner. "Jake, how's civilian life treating you?" I typed back, "Better than expected, sir." Turns out, some missions are worth coming home for. As the sun set over our backyard, I, Jake Walker, former Special Forces interrogator, current single father, and permanently reformed believer in the power of underestimating the quiet ones, watched my son play and made myself a promise. Wesley would never have to be afraid again, and anyone who tried to hurt him would discover what Herman and Marissa had learned. The most dangerous enemy is the one you mistake for prey. Some people, I had learned, confused quiet strength with weakness. Those people discovered their mistake exactly once. I had spent my career protecting innocent people from monsters. I just never expected to find the worst monsters in my own home. But I'd handled them the same way I'd handled every other threat to innocent life, with methodical precision, overwhelming force, and absolutely no mercy. "Daddy, watch me go really high," Wesley called out from the swing set. I smiled. A real smile, warm and genuine. Nothing like the cold expression my enemies had learned to fear. "I'm watching, buddy. I'm always watching." And in a house across town, where Marissa was spending another night alone, wondering how the weak man she'd married had destroyed her entire life so completely, those words would have sent a chill down her spine. Because Jake Walker was always watching, always protecting, and never, ever forgiving those who threatened his family. The quiet ones, as Herman and Marissa had learned too late, were the most dangerous of all.